Welcome. We are diving back into the archives. This is going to be our round one game from the 2007 14th Western Pennsylvania Scholastic Championship. In this game, I had the white pieces against Karthik Naray. So after my previous tournament, we had a bit of a rating drop from my provisional 1008 all the way down to 837. And in this game, I am facing a 968. I'm playing in the intermediate section, which is the second to highest section in the tournament. The championship section, 1200 and above. And this intermediate section was, I believe, 800 to 1199. So, here we go. Looking to turn things around from my previous tournament. Apparently, I was still a D4 player at this point. So tournament number 3, about 5-6 months into playing over the board. And we reach a very normal position. And here I kick their bishop. And I make a classic mistake. I play knight to e5. And it's not that knight e5 in itself is a bad move, but white is not prepared to attack. We can see that white has not developed the rook, queen, bishop, rook, or castled the king, and so it is a bit early to be going after black's position, especially because black already made a mistake themselves, putting the knight on the c6 square and blocking their c-pawn, and so being patient would pay off. I should focus on development with a move like queen c2 or e3. Maybe even rook b1 would be fine here. All right, so I've jumped my knight in, and my opponent captures, and this is the position I was aiming for, thinking that I was attacking the pinned knight with a pawn, and the knight could not move because of the pin to the queen, thinking I want a piece. This is now the second time I've achieved this type of position in my over-the-board play, and for the second time it is met with h6, and rather unsuccessfully, the pieces trade. And we reach this position here. While black's king is a little bit exposed, they do have a solid pawn structure, and they are ahead in development. I throw in this queen d4 check. Does not help my case. They solidify their pawn structure, they block my queen, and I am not catching up in development. So we can see that white has some weak pawns over here and 3 pawn islands. 1, 2, 3 pawn islands, and black has 1 pawn island. All of their pawns are connected on adjacent files, so they have a much better pawn structure. I finally get around to playing e3, my queen gets chased, and here, because of my worse pawn structure, I probably want to keep the queens on the board, or at least not voluntarily give up the file by capturing their queen. Playing bishop captures c4 would probably be a stronger move here. So I trade, I grab this pawn, and we are currently even material. And we reach this position. I have a 4 versus 3 majority on the king side. They have a 3 versus 2 majority on the queen side. But I have a couple of weak pawns. And we'll notice that both of my rooks are very passive, meaning that they are only playing a defensive role. This can be a problem because it's hard to create activity, and especially in rook endgames, it's much more about rook activity than pawn count. And so instead of guarding the c-pawn, I probably should have played something like rook b1 or even rook d1 and tried to get some activity. I now play rook b1, and my opponent creates a 2-on-1 majority on the queen side with a passed a-pawn. My rooks are still pretty passive, but I am surviving, and I play this move c4. A little bit of a nifty move with the idea that their b-pawn is pinned to the rook. They cannot capture, or I will simply be up a rook. They guard, and I start to walk my king over, and we reach this position here. Note that if they take with the pawn, I can play rook captures c4, rook captures c4, king captures c4, keeping material even, and my king is pretty active. So they back up. Whoa. Speed through there again. Keeps jumping us ahead. There we go. And when they back up, we go ahead and play the move c5, attacking the rook. Of course, white can trade, but I was trying to avoid just giving them a passed pawn and having nothing for it. Instead, I chose to give them connected passed pawns in exchange for myself having a passed pawn. Perhaps a good idea in theory. Unfortunately, it does not work out. They simply can capture the pawn, and we reach this position anyway, where black has a passed pawn that is unopposed. And this position should be very good for black. But we will see with me being an 800 and my opponent being a 900 rated player that neither player is able to convert this position very cleanly. So this is well before I learned any rook endgames, being that it was more than 13 years ago. They play rook check, and I run my king up, and they start advancing their b pawn. This is all pretty straightforward. As the white pieces here, I'm just trying to make moves. There's really not much I can do. My opponent reaches this position, which is a very easy win. After king g3, black has a winning move. I will give you a second to pause the video, take a look, see if you can find the winning move for black. Okay, and the winning idea is rook to g1 check, clearing the queening square for the pawn. When my king moves, black will push the pawn and get a queen, and the rook will guard it, so I can't simply capture. And I will be down a rook and losing in that position. Black instead moved their king. I moved my king, which was a good move, getting out of that tactic. They went and continued marching their king over, and I continued marching my king over. Now it should be obvious that the tactic still works. Rook to e1 check. My king moves, and queening the pawn. So when someone has the rook in front of the pawn, one square away from queening, they are trying to create this tactic. And if you're on the defense, you want to hide your king so that they do not have the tactic. So the king on f3 would be a good square. Here, of course, the tactic still exists. And now it does not exist due to rook check, and the king runs, attacking the rook and the queening square. So now white has some real chances to survive. Black plays the move rook to g1, and apparently I played the move f3. I don't remember this exact position, but rook takes b2 looks plenty good to survive. I give up the g pawn, and it should simply be a draw. Maybe it was time pressure. This was game in 30, although I wasn't usually someone to be in time pressure. Maybe I just overlooked it. We both overlooked that tactic several times already. But after rook to g1, f3, I resigned the game. So my guess is that one more move was played, and I just didn't record it because that was the end of the game. But black can play the move b1 equals queen in this position, and I will have to give up my rook, and an easy position for them to finish. So not a great start to this tournament. I am a low-rated player for this section, and this is now 4 losses in a row in my over-the-board career after that great first tournament I had. And so I'm wondering at this point whether or not I should continue to be playing. But I'm going to finish out this tournament. I was there with some friends, and so still having a good time. And I will be back in the next video to show you round 2 to see if we can turn things around. Thanks for stopping by, and good luck in your games.